Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is a, this is, of course, a...
U.S. Vice President JD Vance, who delivered an ideological assault on Europe at last year's Munich Security Conference, accusing its leaders of suppressing free speech and failing to curb illegal immigration, has now sharply criticized Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over her response to a question about U.S. foreign policy toward Taiwan. AOC was asked point-blank, would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move? The question was not the problem. It was Ocasio-Cortez's reaction that went viral and drew flack from the vice president. AOC took an uncomfortable pause to answer the question, and that became the topic of discussion. Watch the video for yourself.
To all of you, and Congressman, I'll start with you, would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is a, this is, of course, a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
When Fox News anchor Martha McCallum showed the clip to VP Vance, his first reaction was, I quote, "It was the most uncomfortable 20 seconds of television I have ever seen." Further, he burst out laughing and said, "I think it's a person who doesn't know what she actually thinks." Vance went a step ahead and commented, "That was embarrassing. Maybe you ought to go read a book about China and Taiwan before I go out on the world stage again," he continued.
Martha, you bring me on your show and you show me the most uncomfortable 20 seconds of television I have ever seen. I think it's a person who doesn't know what she actually thinks, and I have seen this way too much in Washington with politicians, where they are given lines, and when you ask them to go outside of the lines they were given, they completely fall apart. Because look, does anybody really believe that AOC has very thoughtful ideas about the global world order or about what the United States should do with our policy in Asia or policy in Europe? No. This is a person who is mouthing the slogans that somebody else gave her, and it shows how thin the Democrats' policy actually is on all these very, very important questions. Look, that was embarrassing. If I had given that answer, I would say, you know what? Maybe you ought to go read a book about China and Taiwan before I go out on the world stage again. I hope that Congresswoman Cortez has the same humility. I'm skeptical.
Let's go back and watch what AOC actually had to say on the Taiwan issue and other policies of the Trump administration.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is a, this is, of course, a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Is the United States stronger or weaker on the world stage than it was 5 years ago?
I think that the United States is very much in a compromised position compared to where we were 5 years ago. Our relationships with our allies are strained. Our commitment and demonstrated consistency on democratic values, human rights, also incredibly strained. And our domestic situation, I think, is reflecting globally as well, particularly economically. Skyrocketing inflation, tariffs, of course, have hurt Americans, and it has hurt and had a negative impact on the United States globally as well.
Do you think we are in a new world order? We keep on talking about this new world order, but no one really knows what it is.
No, and I think, I think that Prime Minister Carney's remarks at the World Economic Forum were words that rung around the world in raising this question. But I think that also in his remarks, as well as part of this larger conversation, there was this undertone, this undercurrent, this suggestion that it was a rules-based order sometimes. And I think that that is the issue that lies before us, is that in a so-called rules-based order, the rules for whom? Because for all too long, the rules only applied to the United States, Europe, its allies, and we would carve out exceptions for the global south. And I think that when you have a rules-based order where you carve out exceptions to our values, exceptions to our rules, eventually the exceptions become the rules. And I think that, to your original point, over the last 5 years, we've seen such a breaking and such a fraying of these alleged Western values that people wonder if it ever existed in the first place. So I don't know if it's necessarily that we are in a post-rules-based order. I think it's possible that we were in a pre-rules-based order. And we have an opportunity to explore what a world would look like if we upheld democracy, human rights, trade that actually centers working class people instead of accruing overwhelmingly the benefits of trade to the wealthiest. But if we reoriented a new era that could actually help people and show how foreign policy and healthy foreign policy can show up and help them in their lives.
I mean, we have a number of European leaders here, and I know that certainly behind private closed doors, they say, look, the one question I want to ask the U.S. is, if I'm in trouble, will you come and help me? Mm-hmm. Are you still an ally? Mm-hmm. Or do we need to really decouple or certainly de-risk? Your answer to that, Congresswoman.
Well, I mean, we are, of course, representing a broad spectrum of the United States here today. And I think I'm very grateful that we have, it's unfortunate, I guess we have to speak to the elephant in the room, that the partisanship in the United States has made this question something that even has to be asked behind closed doors in the first place. I know that the Democratic Party is here for our allies. We are shocked at the president's destruction of our relationship with our European allies. His threatening over Greenland is not a joke. It is not funny. It threatens the very trust and relationships that allow peace to persist. And so I believe what I can say is that unequivocally, the vast majority of the American people do not want to see these relationships frayed, and they are committed to our partnerships and our relationships and our allies.
Is China primarily an economic competitor? Is it a military threat, or is it like an ideological adversary?
China is, of course, an ascendant global power, growing very quickly, acting in its own self-interest. And oftentimes in Washington, there's this frame between conflict and competition. I think sometimes, depending on what's happening, that rhetoric can get a little conflict-driven. And I think that it's really a question of competition, and to the governor's point, fair competition. But when I think about that, I think about how the United States, if you want to assert oneself as a global competitor, the kinds of things that one would do in order to really assert that position is investments in science and technology, which we are gutting our NIH, we are gutting our health science research, we are cutting the very things that make us a global power in that respect in terms of government and public-funded research, which is what allows innovation in a more broad sense as opposed to privatized research. We, an ascendant global power, would invest heavily in innovative energy solutions so that it could be sovereign in terms of, in that respect. And the United States at this point, instead of expanding our energy mix, we are actively narrowing our energy mix to become increasingly more reliant on fossil fuels, instead of, in contrast to what you see is happening in China. Yes, they burn a very large amount of fossil fuels, but they have also invested dramatically in wind and solar and in energy innovation. And so to me, I see this as a question of competition and, of course, of trade, to the governor's point, but we have to make sure that we are having, I think, a reflection and a reflective conversation about how are we positioning ourselves to continue to offer the world the best of what America has to offer.